Friends, hello, my name is Ihor Havryshchak. This is the YouTube platform of Channel 24. Today is the 29th of June, live broadcast. So as always, be active, put likes, subscribe, of course, comment, leave your questions. We will bring constructive ones into our broadcast. I welcome our guest, opposition politician Gennady Gudkov. Gennady, good day. So Ihor, I greet you, and of course, Gennady. The analysts of the Institute for War Studies say that the war strategy will be forced to change due to the burnout of the Russian economy. They say the following: economic problems and lack of human resources may force the head of the Russian Federation, Putin, to make important decisions regarding the provision of resources for the Russian war in Ukraine. What can be understood by these words? In particular, could there be the appearance of the North Korean troops in Ukraine in the Kursk region? Incomes and so on and so forth. Even though, of course, inflation is rising in Russia, they released statistics yesterday that Russia ranked 8th among the 10 worst countries for inflation.
К сожалению, ему удалось не потерять выручку, а даже ее увеличить. Я имею в виду валютную выручку, которая является ключевой для наполнения бюджета, получения доходов, сверхдоходов и так далее и тому подобное. Ну и несмотря на то, что, конечно, инфляция в России нарастает, вчера там опубликовали статистику, что Россия заняла по этому показателю 8-е место среди десятки худших стран по инфляции.
Nevertheless, the situation is that the resources of Putin's economy, its supply of money, and this is a very large amount of money. Everyone knows that the size of the Russian public debt is only 17% of GDP, while in the G7 countries, this figure is 206 to 210% of external debt. So if the emission capacity, although it has already been reduced, we should not rely on the economy. And then what you said, the second component is people, fatigue. This state of depression and so on and so forth is probably the key thing.
Вот это то, на чем может споткнуться путинский режим, должен споткнуться, что просто люди перестанут воевать.
The main thing that Putin's regime might stumble on is that simply people will stop fighting. The treatment of soldiers is barbaric, morale in the trenches is poor, and this could lead to mass surrenders. Regarding the BRICS summit in Kazan from the 22nd to 24th, we should note UN Secretary General Guterres' visit. What were the results of BRICS? Did Putin achieve his goals by bringing everyone together?
Что вы можете об этом сказать? Достиг целей своих Путин? Зачем он всех собирал? Какая была вот именно цель? Экономическая, военная, потому что договоренности...
What was the goal? Economic or military? No agreements were made on a single currency or military matters. It wasn't Putin who gathered everyone. He merely suggested Kazan, the former capital of the Horde. Whether this was a symbol or not is unclear, but Kazan was once a stronghold of the Golden Horde during its conquest of Russia. Anyway, it's a symbol. So the key actor there was Xi Jinping, not Putin at all. Putin tried, yes, now the result. There was such a story, a small novel written in the years that was attributed to Vladislav Surkov. It was called About Zero, and in one word. Roughly speaking, the whole result of this summit was about zero. That is, there were no decisions that could have led to the original goal of creating this strange, very strange organization. The strangeness of this organization lies in the incongruity of absolutely strange countries. Moreover, there are countries that have internal serious contradictions among themselves, let's say. For example, China and India can hardly give a message there. There is especially no cooperation, no trade, no turnover. Why? Because they have many conflicts, including territorial ones, and border wars break out from time to time. So it's all, as they say, a very strange council. Then there is India, which seems to be on the democratic path, Brazil, which seems to be on the conditionally democratic path, and then there is the fail-safe state, for example, like the Republic of South Africa, which is nothing at all. Putin is trying to politicize BRICS by dragging dictatorships and authoritarian states into it, which leads again to other conflicts. For example, the head prince, the Prince of Saudi Arabia, categorically refused to participate because he has no normal relations with Iran, who was called there, and the Iranian president was there. Or rather, there is a relationship, but very bad. Hostile, I would say. So one came, the other didn't come, took offense.
Поэтому вот один приехал, другой не приехал, обиделся, потом сказали, все, нет, хватит, больше не надо сюда никого звать. В результате ничем это не закончилось.
They concluded that no further invitations were necessary, resulting in nothing significant. Guterres' visit and his deference to Putin reflect the moral decline of the UN bureaucratic system, which is supported by the world's leading powers. The principle is that countries contribute a percentage of their GDP to the UN, granting them equal rights, as seen with China. Naturally, all the main sponsors of the existence of the UN, its organizations and structures, are the world's leading countries, leading economies. If we leave out China and a little bit of India, it is mainly the key democratic countries that maintain this organization. Yes, there are many useful structures there, but in general, the organization is degenerating. We see this in the peacekeepers in Lebanon. We see a complete lack of understanding of the processes we are witnessing in the degradation of the Secretary General, who has already been declared persona non grata. This is the first time in the history of mankind when the head of an international organization created to prevent war in the world is declared persona non grata by a state. Zelensky refused, which, in my opinion, is absolutely right, because the degradation of the UN in his person is colossal. This, in general, kills all the people of collective world security. He's a dynamo. Can you please explain to them why he used to travel? I don't understand. Here was the summit of the world. He had some important business. Here he came to Kazan. Moreover, he was very complimentary. He met with Putin. He was smiling, remembering even that he established the International Criminal Court. It seems to me that Guterres is the next Schroeder, that German chancellor whose last name I have already forgotten. What happened at Gazprom? Yes, I think it's the next level of Schroeder. It's probably even more serious. I agree. The organ has gone completely, so to speak, into hiding. As they say, he sat in a safe house, then came out, announced that he was an agent, and would openly lobby for the interests of a bloody tyrant. I don't know. You see what the problem is? The General Secretary is always elected a person who has no qualities. The grayest, most faceless mouse is elected General Secretary to keep her out of the way. Apparently, she is also easily bought, either on a slight fall or something else. How will we have a network in the Russian segment that has now surrendered for a paycheck? Maybe he came. Apparently, there you see, Putin has a huge resource abroad, money that on Shurtization of Western states, there's such a term, Shurtization, that is bribery. The policy of turning them into puppets who are ready to sell their mother for a third of silver pieces. And as long as this policy is in place, it works. People are hungry for all sorts of benefits and so on, and Putin manages to counteract the world community quite seriously by destroying certain structures of this community from within. So, roughly speaking, exporting corruption, the second equivalent of this shareization, is called exporting corruption, which Putin has spread around the world. I don't rule out that Guterres is either stupid, or utterly unprincipled, or he's just on a bribe, on some kind of hook. Gennady, if we talk about internal processes in Russia, British intelligence reports that Putin is continuing his purge of generals. Timur Ivanov is facing some new criminal charges again, and Russian media is already saying that at least 7 generals have also been hit with consequences in Russia. These are generals from the FSIN, these are generals from the investigative committee. What's going on is a purge. Why?
Как я понимаю, вот вертикаль Путина держится на силовиках, в том числе и генералах. А вот он
Putin's power structure relies on law enforcers, including generals, whom he is now sidelining. We discussed earlier in the war that someone would eventually have to answer for the defeats. Since Putin avoids directly blaming the generals, his tactic appears to be to reassert control over them, ensuring they don't think they are the key decision-makers in the war or in Russia. The method used is a proven, tested, fail-safe one, accusing generals of corruption. And since all of Putin's power is built on corruption, the absolute majority of the people in power are dirty, and there are only a few people who are not dirty, so they try to squeeze them out. All people are involved, at least the leaders, and they are very easy to control. If anything changes, if he doesn't move, if he shows a little independence, a criminal case for corruption is immediately opened. This is a practically foolproof technique. There are folders for everyone, there are materials for everyone. As they say, all it takes is a certain command, a certain sequence, and this person is accused of criminal events, various crimes, in particular corruption, abuse of office, and so on. These cases are not politicized. They are given an absolute economic character. Nevertheless, Putin is restraining the generals, making them consider themselves ordinary people, vulnerable, who can be imprisoned, fired, and, if necessary, mocked, even making it public. That is why there is some kind of purging of generals. In my opinion, it is aimed not only at redistribution of property, which is also a factor of influence, but first and foremost so that the generals do not feel that they are some kind of special power, an exclusive one that can supplant the tyrant's ugly, unlimited power. Putin's unlimited power, by the way, is already evident that North Korean troops will be in Ukraine. Vladimir Zelensky is talking about it, and in the Kursk region, among others. The reaction of Ukraine's partners is, as always, interesting.
Вот реакция партнеров Украины, она, как всегда, интересна. Я процитирую, потому что Пентагон говорит следующее, что...
I will quote because the Pentagon is reporting the following. No more new restrictions on the use of Western weapons, meaning that Ukraine, whose military and political leadership has been saying and asking, give us the green light to strike Russia, including military facilities at full depth, including 300 kilometers. And so the PBC comes out and says the following. No new restrictions. Biden says it's very dangerous that North Korean troops will show up. But Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, says it's an escalation. They're stalling until after the election. They don't want any complications right now. They don't want any sort of discord at all that will have to change. I think this indecision of the West is due to the lack of clear criteria in their political mood. Who will win? How NATO's relations with the United States will develop, what certain political circles and forces will do. It seems to me that their indecision may last until November 5th, and if the continuity of policy is maintained, maybe something will change after November 5. But in general, we see the absolute indecision of the West, I would even say the confusion of the West. That's why the organ is chiming in there, although he did get booed in Georgia. I wonder if they have a shortage of eggs and tomatoes or what. They could have shown more love and respect for Orban in Georgia, not only whistling, but throwing cars at him. I think that would be normal. That's why I'm referring to items causing severe injuries. In general, we see the absolute indecisiveness of the West. Yes. Putin, thank goodness that Israel, helped by striking Iran, taking away its ability to produce drones, ballistic missiles, and so on. Israel did well, providing effective assistance to the armed forces of Ukraine, assistance that is hard to overestimate. The West, for its part, is once again being pussy-whipped. We don't know how it will be. Let's wait for the 5th. Let's not escalate. Yes, they are escalating, but they are expressing deep concern, thinking, we are so tough, if we start, we will finish. This is all great, of course, but it's all at the level of boo-boo. Sorry, I'll put it simply. Gennady, if you recall, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, he met with Indian Prime Minister Modi after Kazan and said that it would be good if India mediated future talks between Ukraine and Russia.
И он сказал, что это бы было хорошо, если бы Индия была посредником в будущих возможных переговорах между Украиной и Россией. И здесь я хотел бы вспомнить слова Путина, опять-таки, после саммита BRICS.
And here I would like to recall Putin's words after the Kazan summit. He said with a smirk that he was ready to stop the war, but only on his own terms, annexing at least 4 regions of Ukraine. Scholz, on the other hand, said he was ready to talk to Putin. I have a question. What can we talk about if Putin says he won't compromise and will annex all the occupied territories? Scholz says he is ready to talk. What can we talk to Putin about? The only thing we can talk about today is to warn him firmly and threaten him that if he is not ready, he is a weakling. In the general opinion of many Germans, he is a weakling. But if he calls Putin now and starts politesse, it will be a defeat. I would like to ask Scholz one question. What mediation, in what process, would he want this grandfather to mediate? What process does he want to set in motion? The surrender of Ukrainian land? Freezing the line of contact? What option is he considering? Because the subjects for peace talks, Putin has made clear many times. I give the command to provide all the necessary weapons and authorization to use them to the full depth of possible actions.
Даже хотя бы со стороны Путина нет никаких предложений по какому-то вменяемому, скажем, завершению войны, вменяемому сценарию завершения войны. Ведь дело в том, что если бы он позвонил и сказал: Путин, слушай меня последний раз. Вот я долго сдерживался. Да, я представляю великий немецкий народ, долго сдерживался, терпел твою наглость, бесцеремонные действия, убийство детей, убийство там, гражданских и так далее и тому подобное, всю твою оккупацию и так далее. Но теперь мое терпение лопнуло. И я тебе, как руководитель большой, огромной страны, с 5-й экономики мира, торжественно заявляю, что если ты сейчас не уберешься до тут, ты не готов будешь убраться, вывести войска, то-то, значит, покаяться, признать вину, заявить о готовности репарации и так далее, то мы, НАТО, и я, в первую очередь, Шольц, как великий канцлер великой страны, я даю команду сейчас дать все необходимое вооружение и разрешение на применение этого вооружения на всю глубину его возможных действий. Вот это единственный разговор, который должен был состояться у какого-то твердого, уверенного в себе и в своем народе лидера с Путиным. Не более того. Если никто не может с ним так говорить, то лучше не звонить. То лучше не показывать слабость, лучше не показывать трусость.
This is the only conversation a firm and confident leader should have with Putin. Nothing more. If no one can talk like that, it is better not to call, not to show weakness and cowardice. All these arguments about responsibility for the fate of history, the need to stop the bloodshed and restore normal world order, to ensure security and so on, it's all, as they say, Vaska is listening. There is such a fable by Krylov when the cat ducked a piece of meat from the big cauldron. The cook says, "How bad it is. Think about how we will think." And Vaska listens and eats. Putin now resembles this impudent cat who stole meat from someone else's pot and continues to eat it, listening to all sorts of arguments about good, evil, morality, and ethics. I feel Scholz is either prepared to speak firmly with Putin or sees no need to call him, since there's nothing to discuss at the moment. I would also like to ask you, the Financial Times says that China really didn't like the fact that North Korea is sending troops to Russia. I wanted to ask you, what is the relationship model between China, North Korea, and Russia? Is North Korea acting on its own considerations with respect to Russia, or is it always Beijing's directive? And so sending troops is a green light from China. From Beijing, or as the Financial Times says, is Beijing not happy with such cooperation? Pekin kept the dog, fed him the required amount, sicked him on whomever he needed, made him bark or walk on his hind legs, and this vicious dog listened to commands perfectly. We remember with Yu Shaigu's visit to North Korea, when the backside turned this Kimchin to Shaigu kept it for a long time because he bowed low to all these Chinese leaders, some third rate. It is clear that not Sejepin, there was someone there, some representatives of the Central Committee of the CPC. But now it turned out that this evil watchdog, someone else began to feed. China is certainly irritated, because now he barks not only at his command. China is annoyed by this, but as I have said many times, I will repeat it again. I remember we talked about it. China will choose the lesser of the two. Let South Korea have some fun. Let it send some soldiers. The main thing is that Putin's regime does not lose, does not collapse, so that China is not left alone. He does not want Putin to lose, because then the geopolitical situation in China will sharply deteriorate. That's why China can grumble about North Korea. Of course, he hardly gave the green light there, and so on and so forth. Gennady, I'd like to ask you about what's happening in Georgia now. The parliamentary elections were held on the 26th. The Georgian dream of Georgia, yes, the pro-government party says they won. The opposition says they won. Exit polls also say different things, depending on who ordered where. Yesterday, a lot of them came out.
Да, Геннадий, хотел вас спросить о том, что сейчас происходит в Грузии. 26 числа там прошли парламентские выборы. Грузинская мечта Грузии, да, партия провластная, говорит, что они победили. Оппозиция говорит, что победа за ними. Экзит-полы тоже разные говорят, в зависимости, кто где заказывал. И вот вчера вышло много...
With 1,000 people on the street, how will you proceed? The situation won't push the West toward Georgia. Ivanishvili, the actual owner of the ruling party, is involved, and while he may claim ignorance, he cooperates with the Kremlin. His pro-Russian opposition exists separately, and the Kremlin seems content with the current situation in Georgia. The Kremlin is completely satisfied with what is happening in Georgia now. I mean, the victory of Dream and the full influence on this dream of Ivanishvili, Putin's, let's say, pro-Russian oligarch, who has the ability to sell and realize all the assets in Russia. When he laid claim to the presidency in Georgia, Putin allowed him to get it. His colleagues in the Kremlin were very much against it, Many said that we will not give him anything, let him lose it all there. But Putin did not allow this. He allowed Ivanishvili to withdraw billions of dollars from Russia, and thus Ivanishvili became his vassal, a person who cannot refuse him. From that moment on, a different story began in Georgia, a story of slow transformation into the Russian space. And the main thesis that Dream used was, look, all the countries that challenge Russia, that go to Europe, it all ends in war, ruin, death. If Ukraine is defended by a democratic coalition, Georgia will not be defended. Many people have seized on this idea. What should we do? But we must realize that if we lose today, and it is real, it will be a loss for the Georgian people and their future. Georgia will gradually turn into an authoritarian, totalitarian state, a la Russia, a la Belarus, and all this post-Soviet tyranny will return there in its worst form. This is what is happening now. Yesterday, a lot of people really gathered. The opposition in Georgia is quite influential, but I see that so far, it is not ready for more decisive actions. Many believe we can achieve freedom without war, but such cases are rare. The peaceful collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 allowed for democracy to flourish in Russia and other republics. While some seized this opportunity, others unfortunately did not. Apparently, freedom must be seriously fought for, and only then it can win. If the Georgian people miss this chance now, they will have no other chance. We must realize this, and there could be a return to a future dictatorship. This will happen not only in Georgia, but also in Armenia. We see Pashinyan, so to speak, deeply submissive, already traveling to see Putin, riding his bicycle along the Moskva-Reki embankment, and talking enthusiastically about his impressions of Russia. By and large, there is a process of restoration of authoritarian and totalitarian contours of future power in Georgia and to some extent in Armenia. Armenia shows its complete incapacity for sovereignty and independence. In general, these are alarming, very scary processes that can begin now in Georgia and in the entire Caucasus. And of course, Putin is absolutely happy with this scenario. Speaking of Georgia, Gennady, please tell me, how big is the role of the influence of Western aid? We just know that Georgia's accession to the EU has been suspended, and the West has been distracted from Georgia. Don't you think that the West should help the opposition more? Because in fact, the democratic world is losing Georgia. I also think that the situation is critical not only for Georgia, but for the entire civilized world. If the West now allows Georgia to return to the bosom of authoritarian unions, totalitarian countries, it will be a huge mistake. This will be a great defeat for democracy in the Caucasus. And look at Azerbaijan. It's a totalitarian state, and to say nothing of Iran, it's a horror what is happening there in Afghanistan, a dictatorship of some inferior perverts, so to speak. I think yesterday they banned women from even reading prayers aloud. And we see that negative processes are going on there now, by and large. Look how many of these kidnappers are established in Central Asia. That is, there is such a restoration going on. There was a revolution, so to speak, in Kyrgyzstan.
И все это практически сейчас задумалось, вернулось на круги своя. Вот, поэтому, конечно,
It seems like democratic processes have begun there, and it's all practically back on its mind now, back to normal.
Островок свободы и демократии. И вот
So, of course, the world may now lose the only, shall we say, island of freedom and democracy in the Caucasus. And look at the litmus test, what the authorities are doing to Saakashvili. I mean, you can say whatever you want, but when you look at how they're bullying him, it in turn reflects how they're going to bully the rest of the people as they consolidate their power.
То есть совершенно понятно, что также они будут издеваться над всем остальным народом, когда укрепят свою власть.
What is happening now will happen to many people in Georgia in the near historical perspective if they do not stop Georgia's movement towards totalitarianism now. And there the key reason is that, pardon the expression, stupid financing, just financing, bribing, buying up. I am convinced that facts of dishonest voting and so on and so forth will be uncovered. I suspect Ivanishvili and Putin are working together to lead the country back to the past, resembling a return to the Middle Ages, though this is just my unconfirmed assumption. Gennady, thank you very much for this conversation. Thank you for taking the time to discuss the really important processes that are taking place in Russia's war against Ukraine and in Russia itself. Not a lot of good things, but we need to talk about that too. Thank you very much. I remind our viewers, Gennady Gudkov was with you. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment,